We're recording. Okay. So I'll give you guys your assignment in just a second, but I want to introduce this overall concept first. Okay. What we're talking about now, we talked about muscular fitness, right? How we assess muscular fitness, 1 RM, maximal grip strength, number of push-ups, sit-ups, something like that. The next piece of kind of fitness-related things that we're going to do, those are going to have to do with cardiorespiratory fitness. Why is this not? It's better, but it's not ideal, is it, guys? Can y'all see that okay? It's a little better than it was? Sorry. Okay. I know the bottom especially is going to be a little bit blurry. I don't really know what else is going on in here. So the next thing we need to talk about is what we call cardiorespiratory fitness, okay? And so this is in many ways endurance capacity. That's what we're getting at here, okay? Cardiorespiratory fitness is going to be much, much more complicated to explain the kind of physiology that contributes to it than simply looking at muscular strength. I mean, muscular strength is muscle size and your ability to turn on whatever muscle you have. Cardiorespiratory fitness is going to involve the heart, the lungs, blood vessels, capillaries, mitochondria in muscles, okay? Lots and lots of things. So it's more complicated. But what we do know, okay, is our gold standard measure of cardiorespiratory fitness, which we call Vo2 Max, the volume of oxygen that can be taken in from the environment at the lungs, circulated out to your skeletal muscle by your cardiovascular system, and then used in your mitochondria to produce ATP. That's what Vo2 Max is, the largest amount of oxygen that we can use to make ATP. Vo2 Max is our gold standard measure of cardiorespiratory fitness, okay? This is the endurance analog to maximal strength, to 1 rep max or to maximal grip strength or something like that, okay? Remember that we can predict mortality rates by grip strength, or we can predict mortality rates by leg press strength, something like that. We can even more accurately predict mortality by what your Vo2 max is, okay? By what your Vo2 max is. The higher your Vo2 max, the longer you're going to live, okay? And so you can imagine, because it integrates muscle function, cardiovascular function, pulmonary function, that it is going to inform a lot of things where there are chronic diseases. Cardiovascular disease oftentimes makes Vo2 max go down. Pulmonary diseases, emphysema, COPD, they make Vo2 max go down. Okay? That's going to kind of encompass all of this. What we know, okay, is that high levels of cardiorespiratory fitness, which are going to be the result of moderate to high intensity aerobic exercise, tend to offset much of the deleterious effects of obesity, okay? So if you are relatively active at moderate to high intensities, you can have a relatively kind of high aerobic fitness level or a reasonably high Vo2 max that will counteract any deleterious effects, or many of them, from being obese, okay? So more so even than muscular strength. There was a big debate about 20 years ago on, we think obesity is bad, but can we, if you're still active, can you be obese and trained? Are you better off than sedentary and untrained? Kind of, can fitness subsume this idea of obesity? Okay, so we're going to talk a little bit about what is Vo2 max today, And then we're going to talk about how should we train to make Vo2 Max go up. All right? So here's what I want you guys to do first. You can do this with a partner, or you can do it by yourself. I don't care. All right? First and foremost, what I want you guys to try to come up with is, if we needed to go right now and figure out who was the best endurance athlete in the class, okay? Our distance runner on the track team is actually not here, so she can't weigh in. But if we had to go and do a test right now, what would we do? What would you guys have us do? Okay, that's your first question. So work on that with a partner. You come up with like 2 possibilities of things that you would try to do. Okay, that's your first task. For my folks on Zoom, work on that. Put it in a Word doc or a Google doc if you want. Keep it to yourself. I'll ask you guys to chime in, and then you guys will email that to me at the end of class so I can give you credit for having it. Okay?
Is this something we're writing down?
Yes.
Okay.
Write it down, put your name on it. You're going to turn it in today. You can move your stuff around if you would like to, or you can just kind of stay where you are and work by yourself. Doesn't really matter. Okay? Sure. The question is, if we want to know among people in class who has the highest VO2 max, who is the best endurance athlete in the class, what test should we do to determine that? Okay? What could I ask all of you guys to go do right now that would give us an answer or an approximate answer? Okay? All right. Go. Just sit up all by themselves, push up all by themselves, hands are up. That's all. We don't need men, women, youth. Correct. If I call you by the wrong name, that's why. So much lighter. Very distracting. Got you? Okay. That's okay. You're gonna start. It's okay if you want. That's all right. You can deal with that. Got one solid, we'll work on another. Okay. Good. Zach's working by himself. You're doing all right. Camilla's are doing okay. Whatever. Okay. I'll call that. Well, I turned in a scathing grade report to the athletics people who were asking about things. So they do that like every 2 weeks. And so, no, we didn't have grades yet. I didn't know how we're doing this class. Okay. Y'all got something? Wow, you got everybody's stroke volume. Okay. But we can, but it's hard. I mean, we could do it. I was just thinking, like, you know, could I just ask you to go do something today? It's gonna make you, whatever it might be. That's okay. What you said is 100% right. That would definitely work. But I gotta like run an arterial catheter like into your aorta and try to figure that part out. So that might be less than ideal for most people. There is a test, yes. No, I probably should have said more like a field test or something. Not we're going to put you on the treadmill and hook you up to the metabolic cart and actually test it. But, you know, we'll do something else. Like what else could we do? We will be more specific probably. So, okay.
So I last semester strength and conditioning or the strength and conditioning one. And we had to do like a lab report, and they were talking about elevation. I did my lab report on elevation at the training kind of thing.
Yep.
Because I know like the training centers in Colorado and like the whole elevation is a thing. So I did it like if you can't reach and then how do we replace it with a max to the difference. And I guess someone I think brought it up yesterday.
Remind me of that when we come back from our break. We'll do growth science.
Okay. Because it actually, like in the lab report, it said it works for Vo2 Max. People's Vo2 Max
Interesting. Okay. I haven't seen that, but I can explain, depending upon what it is, I can try to explain what it does.
I was trying to find the same report that I had.
Okay. Kelly, you all right?
Yes, I'm done.
Okay. We're done. All right. All right, let's start then with, I'll just like pick a group, any group. So, Kelly, pick a group for us. You pick somebody and we're going to ask them. You don't have to give me your test. You pick one of the other groups.
Okay, group 1.
Who's group 1? Who wants to be group 1? So
I
you're going to pick them. Okay. Taylor, Hannah, what did you guys come up with as our way to test who has the highest Vo2 max?
Okay, well, you know that it's wrong, but what we did come up with was that calculate stroke volume.
Okay.
And then use that
Yes.
as the greatest.
So what you guys said is probably like the single most accurate way to do this. Like it's not wrong. It's very, very much right. It's incredibly infeasible. So what they said was, much like we talked about in last class, Vo2 max is very much dependent upon cardiac output. The larger your cardiac output, the larger your Vo2 max. And in people, in you guys, you're all about the same age, so your max heart rate's about the same. So we can use the Fick equation. It should be stroke volume. That's the predictor. The problem with that is to measure your stroke volume, I probably need to run an arterial catheter up into your aorta and measure the amount of blood that leaves your heart directly every time it beats. Now, you know, snake it in from like down here at your femoral artery, or run some kind of a central line or something. Like it can be done, but it may not be the most pleasant thing in the entire world. The other way to indirectly calculate stroke volume is you breathe while you're running or biking. You breathe into this giant balloon, okay? We did this when I was a grad student. It's terrible. You breathe into this giant balloon. It's called a Douglas bag. And then you breathe in there for a while, and then they shut off your ability to get air from out in the room, and you're just breathing the air you've already breathed out into the balloon over and over again. It's called CO2 rebreathing. So I exhale into this balloon, and it raises the carbon dioxide level of the air in the balloon. So then I start breathing it back in, and I have this lower oxygen, higher CO2 levels, and we can use that to see how it is altering blood gases, and we can back calculate stroke volume from all of that. The problem is, while you're breathing into the balloon, you feel like you can't get enough air because you can't get enough like oxygen, and you get really lightheaded. It's terrible, but it works. So measure stroke volume. Ding ding, winner, that would be great. But I can't measure your stroke volume right now. So we'll try someone else. We'll try the Camillas. What'd you guys come up with? Okay. 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 So run a mile. So whoever can run a mile the fastest may have the higher VO2 max. Okay. We're going to ask some others. We're going to come back to that, though. We're going to come back. Those are good ideas. Okay? Those are good ideas. We'll just move back. Abigail, what'd you guys get? Okay? Okay. Okay. So I have a question for you guys. Measure heart rate during a mile. Very, very reasonable thing to do. How many of you like to run? Anybody like to run? Boo to all of you guys. Okay. So we're going to pick someone. Samantha, you didn't put your hand up. You don't like to run. I don't like to run. I hate it. It's the worst thing in the entire world, outside of rowing. Okay. Which reminds me, I got to cancel my Orange Theory thing today. Again, because I get a vaccine on Friday. Yay. Anyway, okay. Samantha, you don't like to run? No. Okay. If I told you you've got to go run a mile right now, could you do it? Like I'm running behind you with like a cattle prod or something. Like, could you run a mile, do you think? You wouldn't want to. Because you wouldn't want to, how fast would you go? Not very fast. Okay. So my question for my heart rate folks, Abigail has I have a really good idea measuring heart rate during a mile. What if I'm going to run like this? The people on Zoom can't see, but I'm just sort of like strolling. I'm barely moving, okay? I can keep my heart rate steady if I go really, really slow, right? But does that tell us anything about how fit I am if I'm going really, really slow? That's my question. What do you guys think? Camillers are saying no. Abigail, what do you think? Okay. If I have two people that are at different levels of fitness, somebody is really well trained, somebody's not very well trained, and we have them run at the same pace, who should have the higher heart rate? Exactly. Exactly. Somebody that is less trained at any given running speed is going to have a higher heart rate, right? So y'all's idea of using heart rate is 100% correct. We just have to be careful on, I have to try, which I don't want to try because I hate running, okay? So you've got to make sure, right, Samantha's just puttering along because she's mad at us, and her heart rate's super low because she's not having to work very hard. And we might think then, oh, she's super fit, but she may not be, okay? Good. All right. Mitchell, Bria, what did you guys come up with?
So we said like a 5K and just like
Okay.
who would get like, essentially we did like, okay, whoever like wins is more fit.
Okay. So same kind of idea, right? Run a 5K. Okay. It's a little longer than a mile. I might argue that a 5K might actually be even better than a mile. A mile is short enough that we may have a little bit of anaerobic metabolism that can kind of come into play, especially if you kick in a certain way. So, okay, 5K seems perfectly reasonable. We want to run a 5K next Monday, class 5K.
Okay.
Whoever wins, like gets a free A on their test or something. Now I have y'all's attention, right? Now you guys are paying attention. Okay. All right. So Maddie, who was writing for y'all's group? What'd y'all come up with? Samantha, what'd you come up with?
We just said like we could run for the longest or like bike for the longest.
Okay. So run the longest, not so much the fastest, but like, could you run for 5 hours or 6 hours or 8 hours or something? Okay. There are races, right? Like these ultra endurance races where people will run for like a day straight, which I don't really understand what's wrong with those people. So like that's a very, very impressive sort of physical thing to be able to do, but I don't understand it. Why would you want to torture yourself in that particular, maybe that's the point. I don't know. Okay. That would also be fine. How fast can I cover a certain amount of distance? Also, how long can I go without having to stop? All of those are very, very reasonable. Okay. Zach, what'd you come up with? Uh-huh. Okay. Sure. Okay.
Also, like I said, 1.5 mile run is like 7 miles kind of using almost, I think that would be the number of.
So you guys will see later today, one of the ways that we can try to assess this is that one of the field tests is a 1.5 mile run. And usually the 1.5 miles is a little more accurate than the mile. What you guys are going to do in lab though, and I'm going to do this just so we can go ahead and move on. My other folks, you all will get your turn on the next one. The test that we're going to use in the lab is walking for 6 minutes as fast as you can. I can predict your VO2 max reasonably accurately if I know your weight and your age and your sex and your resting heart rate and how far you can walk in 6 minutes. That's what you guys are going to do for your next lab. And then we're going to see who has the highest VO2 max, and then we'll give that person an A on the test, okay? So I'm just kidding. We'll never penalize you guys for not being in shape, because I would be, whatever shape you guys are in, I'm in worse shape. I promise you. Okay? I promise. Okay. Very good. All right, Bailey, did you have a question? No, her thing is just lit up on there. She's actually not moving. Okay. So we've already seen this, guys, right? This is the dose response of physical activity and fitness on mortality. And so remember, I showed you guys that if you're active, right, this is people that are very sedentary. Here's the most active people that we can find. If we just simply measure like steps per day or calories burned, right, in physical activity, that the more we do, the lower your all-cause mortality risk. But if you look at this, here it talks about physical fitness. This physical fitness, this is a measure. When they say fitness here, they mean VO2 max, okay? They mean VO2 max. That's what the surrogate for this is going to be. So what you guys can note is that the people with the highest VO2 max have the lowest mortality rates, okay? And really, we get a really, really big drop if we can just get a little bit of an increase in our VO2 max. If you just get a little bit of an increase up to like the 25th percentile, you're going to get a very, very significant reduction. The problem with this, as we will see, guys, is if I want to make your VO2 max go up, you can't walk unless you're really, really out of shape. You've got to do moderate to vigorous intensity aerobic activity. So you can't be on the elliptical at the Huff talking on your phone and probably be able to improve your VO2 max, okay? You got to be really unfit like me to have to pull that one off, okay? If you are even the least bit fit, which most people y'all's age are, we have to do probably vigorous. You've got to jog, you've got to go to spin class or something and go at a pretty, reasonable intensity on the bike, or if you're on the elliptical, you got to do stuff. Now, sometimes I see people on the Stairmaster. You guys see folks on the Stairmaster going sideways, up the Stairmaster sideways. I don't know what they're doing. The Stairmaster is hard. The Stairmaster is a really, really good workout, okay? It can make your VO2 max go up. I'm not sure about going sideways on that, but that's what we've got. So that's the difference here, okay? In order to get market increase in VO2 max, as you all will see, We have to overload the cardiovascular system. We have to overload your pulmonary system. We have to overload the mitochondria in your muscles. And to do that, for most of you, you've got to go at a reasonable kind of vigorous intensity. Okay? You guys with me so far? Yes? Do we need to stand up and do some vigorous intensity like jumping jacks right now? No? You guys don't want to be more fit? Okay. All right. So the other piece of all of this, okay, much like what we talked about with resistance training, is why test cardiorespiratory fitness? Other than knowing how long you're going to live, what is the utility of all of this? Okay? And it's very much just like measuring 1 rep max or maximal grip strength or something like that. It's helpful for us to know how fit you currently are, okay, so that we can provide a basis for exercise program. If I know what your VO2 max is now, I can use that number to prescribe a running speed or a cycling resistance. I can prescribe aerobic exercise so that it occurs at some percentage of your VO2 max, okay? It's our analog to 1 rep max. So we have a basis for programming. It gives us an ability to track how much work you can do, to track changes with training. The other thing that it does is, in a lot of the ways that we end up testing for VO2 max in a laboratory, it also can let us screen for coronary artery disease. One of the ways that we do this, and you all will do this if you take exercise testing and prescription, one of the tests that we do in a lab to determine your VO2 max without having to hook you up to the metabolic cart and capture all the air that you're breathing in and out, is you get on the treadmill and you walk for 3 minutes at like 1.5 miles an hour at like 6% grade. Then you go to like 2.2 miles an hour at an 8% grade. And every 3 minutes it keeps going up and up and up. It's called the Bruce protocol. And it's laid out, if we know how much you weigh, we know your age, we can see how long do you have to walk doing this kind of switching every 3 minutes protocol until you reach some heart rate, and we can use that to predict your VO2 max. The more fit you are, the longer it takes you to reach that. But while we do that, we put an EKG on you, and we measure what's happening to, right, your P waves, your QRS complex, your T waves, and we can assess while this is happening if you are at risk of having, or if you currently have coronary artery disease. So we can get kind of 2 things out of all of this. Okay? So we know about this, these kind of things, and let's just revise our goals to kind of reach effectiveness. All right, so we've talked about this like at the very, very first couple of days of class. We've mentioned it along the ways, but as I said, our measure of cardiorespiratory fitness is called VO2 max, okay? This is the single most valid assessment of cardiorespiratory fitness. It's probably the single most useful physiological variable that we can measure to predict health and disease, okay, is VO2 max. It's so useful because it encompasses function of the heart, the lungs, blood vessels, blood, and then muscles all simultaneously. VO2 max is what we call an integrative measure. An integrative measure, okay? If you have a problem in the heart, that is going to affect your VO2 max, even if your muscles work fine, or even if your blood vessels work fine. It's gonna all work together. The normal way in a lab that we measure this is, I would ask Taylor to come up, and we're gonna put her on the treadmill, okay? And we would put her on the treadmill, we would hook her up to this metabolic cart that we have over here, right? We put this wonderful head thing on, we make a mouthpiece, and she breathes into this mouthpiece, and we're gonna collect the gases that she's expiring out. Then we have her exercise on the treadmill, and every couple of minutes we make it either the grade go up if she's jogging, or we make the speed go up. And we just tell her that you're just gonna keep going until you can't go anymore. Basically, you're gonna go until you black out, or you just physically can't go that faster at that intensity. okay? And what happens is, as we measure directly oxygen consumption, as work rate on the treadmill goes up by increasing speed or the grade, then oxygen consumption is going to go up in this relatively linear manner, okay? As you run faster, you use more oxygen. As you go up a hill at the same speed, you use more oxygen. It requires more force, so you have to engage more muscle, you need to use more oxygen. We will reach, theoretically, some place, some work rate, okay, where if we increase the work rate even more, we cannot use any more oxygen. We've basically maxed out the ability of the heart and the lungs and the blood and your muscles to bring in and use oxygen. And so then we can increase the work rate more and your oxygen consumption plateaus off, okay? You're doing more work, but we're using energy from anaerobic metabolism to do that extra work above and beyond what we were. Okay? This is called a plateau. To have a really, really, really valid measure from a research perspective of your VO2 max, we need to see this. This rarely happens during normal exercise tests. You're going to get up to this point and you're going to reach this and we're going to try to increase the work rate and you're going to be like, nope, I'm done. Stop. Okay? So what we do then is we cheat. You get to here and then we let you rest for a half an hour and then we put you back on the treadmill at the next work rate and we see if we can force it to go up in power. Okay? So it's not the world's most pleasant test, but it's not the worst. Like you go and it's just like exercising. Really, the last couple of minutes suck, but that's pretty much it. Okay? And then we know what your VO2 max is. So this is a laboratory way of measuring all of this. Okay? Obviously, as you guys were pointing out with the things that you were talking about, we can measure it without having to do a laboratory test in a host of different ways. And I'll talk about a couple of those. Okay? But knowing this is really, really valuable and really, really important. Okay. So I told you guys on Monday, okay, that I was going to introduce a concept of something called arterial venous oxygen difference. Okay, we've already talked about Q stands for cardiac output, and that we could use these two things in conjunction to predict what your VO2 or your VO2 max is going to do. So remember that cardiac output is heart rate multiplied by stroke volume. That's what Q is. Okay. AVO2 difference is the amount of oxygen taken out of arterial blood and then theoretically used in a particular tissue. So it's the difference in arterial and venous oxygen concentrations across a tissue. Cardiac output, we say, tells us about the ability of the heart and lungs to deliver oxygen to your muscles. Okay? It's a delivery issue. Whereas AVO2 difference tells us something about what we call utilization. Utilization is going to be what can the mitochondria in a muscle actually use. Okay? I can take all of you and I could give you a blood infusion and I could make your ability to deliver oxygen go up. Okay? And we could see then if under normal circumstances that this delivery side is the thing that limits your VO2 max, or if it is actually what the mitochondria can do. And so there's been big debates in exercise physiology about, in certain people, are you limited by cardiac output? Are you limited by the number of capillaries and diffusion? Are you limited by mitochondrial function? And the answer is yes, all of the above, depending upon those things. But that's what we're going to get at, okay? So Taylor, you and Hannah, you guys had actually written down the Fick equation on your paper, which makes me think you had one, either seen it beforehand, I feel like, or you'd looked ahead in the notes, which you didn't have. So have you guys seen this before in a different class? You have, okay. What class was it? Do you remember? In personal training, okay, good. So the Fick equation is a way for us to put together this integrative concept that oxygen consumption at any point in time. All of you guys have a VO2 value right now, okay? How much oxygen are you using at this point in time for metabolism? And that we can predict what that is based upon your heart rate, your stroke volume, and your AVO2 difference, okay? So if we know that your stroke volume is 80 milliliters per beat, you're at 70 beats per minute, and you have an AVO2 difference of 10 milliliters or whatever over some time period, we can multiply all of those together, and we can figure out how much oxygen are you using right now, okay? So you can imagine then that VO2 max is maximal oxygen consumption. It will be the product of maximal heart rate, maximal stroke volume, and maximal AVO2 difference. Okay? So if we want to figure out who's going to have the highest VO2 or how to make your VO2 go up, you need to either be able to raise your max heart rate, which you can't. So you need to raise stroke volume and or raise the ability to extract oxygen and utilize it in your muscles. Okay? And so when we talk about adaptations to aerobic training, they're all going to focus primarily on how we make stroke volume and therefore cardiac output go up, and how we make mitochondria go up. Okay? On these two particular things. All right. Questions? Comments? You guys seem sleepy. I know it's warm. Do we need to make your VO2 go up? Make the people on Zoom turn their cameras on, and we'll make them do jumping jacks because they're not here in your bedroom. Okay. All right, so let's talk a little bit about VO2 max values. I'll talk about the units on all of this. So, and then we'll get into the numbers. So when we express VO2 max values, the units are going to be milliliters of oxygen per kilogram of body weight per minute. So it is in essence, per how much you weigh, how much oxygen are you using over the course of 1 minute, okay? So when we measure a VO2 value, when we measure it in expired air, we're getting a volume in liters per some unit of time. We take that value and we divide it by people's body weight, because people that are bigger tend to have a larger absolute VO2 max, but they also have more body to have to carry around and move. And so we need to normalize it by body weight so we can compare men to women, big people to small people, etc. Okay? So I do want you guys to know these values. Okay? An average college-aged woman has a VO2 max value probably somewhere between 30 and 40 milliliters of oxygen per kilogram of body weight per minute. 30 to 40. Okay? An average college-aged male is probably 35 to 45. Okay? Why do you guys think men might have, normalized to body weight, a slightly higher VO2 max than women? Bigger heart, okay? What if I told you, tell you that heart size tends to be proportionate to body size, and so that if we're accounting for weight, we may be able to wash some of that out. You are right, men do tend to have a bigger heart. What else might we say? What else might be physiologically different between men and women? Anybody know? Camilla, you're sort of smirking. What do you think? Testosterone. What might having that higher testosterone level tend to lead to? They have more muscle. Okay. Guess where we use the oxygen? Muscle. Okay. So women tend to have less muscle than men. What do they also tend to have more of than men? Fat. Okay. We'll talk about body composition and those kinds of things. A average college-aged male probably has somewhere between maybe like 10 to 15% less body fat than an average college age woman does, okay? Ladies, you all get below about 10% body fat, you stop having your period, you become amenorrheic, right? The body shuts things down because it thinks you don't have enough energy reserves for carrying a child, okay? Yay, the wonders of being a woman, okay? Extra fat, you have a period every month, right? It's great. When you do get pregnant, you have to carry that child. It's going to be ungrateful about it. This is my wife talking. I'm championing my wife here for like 9 months in the midst of all of that. We had a late evening. Our daughter got up at 2:30 in the morning and did not want to go back to sleep. And my wife might have said things like, you know, I carried you for 9 months. Do you need to go to sleep right now or something? Mommy loves you, but this needs to stop. So things, okay? So because of that, okay, because in general, men tend to have a little bit less body fat than women. They tend to, per their body weight, they have more muscle per body weight than women do. So their Vo2 max values are going to be a little bit higher. If we normalize, if we find men and women that weigh the same, that have the same body composition, then basically their Vo2 max values, if their training is equal, will be spot on, okay? It's really just an issue for the most part of body composition, okay? And so because of all of that, in elite female distance athletes, they're going to have values from maybe about 60 up into the mid 70s. I think the highest ever recorded in a woman is like 77 or 78. In men, they're going to be like 75 to 85. The highest ever recorded in a male cyclist, I believe, was 97. Weirdly enough, that guy was actually not that good of a cyclist. Super Vo2 max, not a very good racer, okay? So take that for what it is. He may live for forever, but he was not the world's best racer. So we see these kinds of things here. So when you wonder in some ways, why is the world record mile time, 2 mile time, distance cycling race, distance swimming race, whatever it is, why do men tend to have faster times than women at the elite level? It's very likely because of this, okay? It's very likely because of this. So some additional content. We talked about kind of average and top end. Let's talk about why Vo2 max is predictive of mortality. In people that are post-myocardial infarction, so you're post-heart attack, they may have values that are about 20, okay? 20 mLs per kg per minute. If I want to evoke, okay, 20 mLs per kg per minute of VO2 in Lily, if I ask her to get up and come get on the treadmill and jog at about 5 miles an hour, she would probably be at 20 without too much trouble. She might be over that, okay? Lily, do you think you could jog at 5 miles an hour? Maybe for a little bit, okay? But imagine you guys jogging at very, very slow pace, 4.5, 5 miles an hour. That's the most that a person after a heart attack can do, okay? That is an all-out kind of exercise for them. That tells you how much impairment there is in their cardiac function, okay? Even worse than that, if we look at people that are pulmonary patients, so you have chronic obstructive pulmonary disease, you have very, very severe asthma, or you have emphysema, okay? Theirs may be even lower, right? 12 or 13 to about 15 mLs per kg per minute. And that's with their oxygen tanks, okay? So these people, walking is a maximal effort for them, okay? Walking for them is like an all-out sprint to you guys. So appreciate why when I have a higher Vo2 max, that's actually going to allow me not just to be a good endurance athlete, it's just going to allow me to walk or to walk upstairs or to jog, okay? Or go hiking or whatever else it is that you might want to do. And I need to do those things in order to gain some of the other kind of positive benefits of physical activity. So if your Vo2 max is really, really low, any kind of physical activity is just completely exhausting. You can't do it. Okay? Does that make sense? You guys following me on all of that? Okay? Good deal. All right, let's take a 4-minute break here. Okay, we'll come back at noon, and then we'll go on to the next step. We're recording again. So, a couple of other things to keep in mind when we're trying to determine a person's VO2 max. Okay? Much like that strength is test type dependent, it's very specific to the test type. VO2 max is also, to a lesser extent, dependent upon the test type. Okay? In order to get the absolute highest VO2 max value, I need you guys to run, okay? Or maybe cross-country ski. Okay? Anybody ever been cross-country skiing? So my parents had it was called a Nordic track. It was a cross-country skiing, like ergometer trainer thing when I was little, and it sucked. Cross-country skiing is a great workout, but the idea is the more muscle you engage during exercise, the higher your VO2 max will be, the higher your O2 use will be. So you need something like running where you're engaging your upper body, okay, as well as your lower body, or cross-country skiing where you're engaging upper body and lower body. Rowing works pretty well, but rowing is actually body weight supported, and so that creates a little bit of a problem. So running gives us the highest. Cycling is good, but it may be somewhere between 5 or 10% kind of an undershoot on things. You can assess it. We've done a research study where we did this, but you do arm crank. You just ride the bike with your arms. It's the weirdest phenomenon you've ever experienced. You're cranking with your arms, and you get done like you cannot. The resistance goes up and up and up and up, and you keep going and you keep going, and you get where you can't turn the crank anymore, but you're not out of breath. It's the strangest kind of thing. It would be a maximal test of arm cycling. And so it's going to be somewhere between maybe 25 to 35% less than a running test. Okay? So we can do and assess this, with any kind of exercise modality if we want to. All right? When you take Dr. Mike's exercise phys class, he'll tell you the difference between why running is called a max and why cycling is called a peak, and people argue about it, and it doesn't really make that much of a difference. But that's kind of the general idea. Right? Okay. Our person that we are interviewing for our job right now, she studies the genetic contribution of mitochondrial DNA variants to VO2 max trainability. So your VO2 max is somewhere between maybe 25 and 40% or so influenced by genetics. Okay? Your mitochondrial genetics come from your mother. Your cardiorespiratory genetics come from both mom and dad. So if your mom was a good distance runner, you have a better chance of being a good distance runner than somebody whose mom was not a good distance runner. Okay? So some people are just naturally going to have higher VO2 maxes. Genetically, you have a larger heart, therefore you have a larger stroke volume. Genetically, you have more type 1 fibers, so you have more mitochondria. You'll have a higher VO2 max. Genetically, you have more capillaries that go to those muscles, so you can deliver more oxygen. So there is a big genetic component. Okay? There are some of us, maybe some of you, I know I'm not one of them, but there are some of you that genetically do not respond to aerobic training by increasing VO2 max. Run as much as you want, as fast as you want, your VO2 max never goes up. Okay? Blame your mom for all of that. Blame your dad. But there are people that are that way. They are non-responders. Most of you guys can increase it 20, 30%, not a problem whatsoever. Okay? Okay. Your training status. So people that do more aerobic training. If you run more, or you cycle more, right? You do more Peloton classes than somebody else, you're probably going to have a higher VO2 max. We already talked about the influence of sex. Men tend to be greater than women. Young people tend to have higher VO2 maxes than old people. Why? All of you should have an advantage over me in your VO2 max. Why is that? Anybody know? That's right, Mitchell. Max heart rate. Maximal cardiac output is dependent upon maximal heart rate. Mitchell, do you mind me asking, how old are you? You're 21. Your age predicted max heart rate is 199 beats per minute. I am 42, soon to be 43. So my age predicted max heart rate is going to be what? 178. So you have 21 more beats per minute of heart rate than I do. So assuming our stroke volumes were similar, which they probably aren't, but they could be, you can increase cardiac output to a greater extent than I can just because you're younger, okay? Now imagine you're my father, who will soon be 74, okay? His age predicted max heart rate is like 136 or some super low number, okay? Is that right? No, I've got that off. Like 146, somewhere in there, okay? That makes a difference. There's a reason that endurance athletic performance declines with age. Okay? I'll see if I can dig up the video, but there's an Olympic, a Norwegian Olympic athlete who is a runner, and they're doing a VO2 max test on the bike on him, and he's like 97 years old. And dude is just crushing it, okay? And at 97, his VO2 max was like 38 mLs per kg per minute. It's what an average like college age person is. And so we saw the video one time, I'm like, that dude's gonna die. Like, this is incredibly dangerous, but he's on an EKG. There was a cardiologist that was there, and he's just crushing it, okay? And so that is one of the reasons that we have issues with mortality and stuff with age, is that there's a decline in VO2 max because you age naturally. As we age, we become less active, so there's less training stimulus. Those two things combine together, and we get this big dip and decline in VO2 max with age. Altitude and air pollution are going to affect it. This is great. Hallie's going to Idaho to go skiing. You're going to be at altitude. You have any idea like what the altitude is where you're going? No? Okay. Anybody ever been like to Colorado or New Mexico, like been skiing or been someplace where you're up and you try to go hiking like in the mountains in Colorado and you're like, why am I out of breath? Like, this is not that hard. A couple of years ago, we went to try to go hike to St. Mary's Glacier in Colorado, which is not that far from Colorado Springs, I think. And like at this very top, like last portion, we were going up a hill that was like this tall. It was like all I could do to freaking walk, right? There's no air. And so because there's less air, there's less oxygen, it's harder to get oxygen in. So we can't load our red blood cells. So altitude matters. When you go to a higher altitude and doing stuff feels more effortful, you feel like you're out of shape for what you normally would be, it's real. It's a physiological certainty. Air pollution also matters. That's not a big deal here. But if there's particulate matter in the air that's going to affect your lungs, that can also have some things that are going on. We already talked about cardiovascular disease, COPD, and those kinds of things. We talked about this. So we talked about METs in the first couple of days of classes. I want to give you some more context on how a MET equates to oxygen consumption, okay? So remember that we can prescribe exercise or physical activity intensities based upon METs. One MET is one metabolic equivalent, which is your resting metabolic rate, okay? In most of you, your resting metabolic rate is about 3.5 mLs of oxygen per kg per minute. Pretty standard across all of you guys, okay? So one MET is a VO2 of 3.5. 2 METs is a VO2 of 7. 3 METs is 10.5, so on and so forth. So remember that moderate intensity physical activity is 3 to 6 METs. Okay? So at 5 MEPs, that's 17.5 mLs per kg per minute. That's brisk walking. I'm a cardiac patient. I'm a pulmonary patient. My VO2 max is 15 or 16. I can't get right to even 5 MEPs of physical activity on doing this. And so that's kind of how all of this is going to be. It's going to be anaerobic. Okay. So we talked about how we can measure this. We can do a maximal test, which I talked about. The other way gets at what both of my kind of first couple of groups were talking about in how are we going to guess your VO2 max. Okay? One way that we can do things by not having you go all the way doing maximal exercise, because that may be dangerous, is to do a sub-maximal bout of exercise and measure your heart rate. Okay? You guys will see, we'll talk much more about this next Monday, that we can use your heart rate during physical activity as a way to guess at what your oxygen consumption during physical activity is. So we give you some kind of sub-maximal work rate on the bike or the treadmill, and we measure your heart rate. Then we give you a slightly higher sub-maximal work rate, and we see how much your heart rate goes up, and so on and so forth. And then we can use all of that to make a prediction on if we took the work rate all the way out, right? And so we could figure out what your max heart rate is. What at that work rate it would require a certain amount of oxygen. That would be your VO2 max. Okay. In a normal semester, this is what we do in lab number 2. We put you on the bike and we do something called the Ymca bike test. Okay. And so this is a graph showing the relationship between oxygen consumption at any work rate. This would be max, like out here, walking, jogging, maximal running here, and your heart rate. There's this nice linear relationship that as work and metabolism goes up, heart rate goes up in a very linear corresponding manner. And so if we know that you're here, right, you've got a heart rate of like 140 at some work rate, and then we can predict the slope of this line. We can guess at where you would be at your maximal heart rate and guess kind of what your VO2 would be at that place. That's the general idea. And so we do this Ymca bike test where we give you a certain resistance on a bike, we measure your heart rate. We give you a higher resistance, we measure your heart rate. And we put all that together and we draw this graph and we extrapolate and we guess kind of what your VO2 max is. Okay? There's lots of different tests. There's multiple bike tests. There's multiple treadmill tests. There's a step test where you get up on these steps that we have over here. If you take exercise phys lab, you do the step test. So we can use all of this, but the key is work rate goes up and we track your heart rate. And if we know your max heart rate and we know your heart rate at a couple of sub-maximal levels, we can predict out kind of what we think your VO2 max should be over time. Okay? So you guys aren't going to do that. You're going to do a walking. You're just going to walk as fast as you can for 6 minutes, and we're going to use a slightly different. These heart rate based ones are going to be better, but than the purely non-heart rate based inference tests, but they're not too bad. Okay? It is easier for us to do a sub-maximal test where we predict based upon heart rate than it is to do a maximal test. Okay? Most of you, many of you have a watch or a heart rate monitor of your own, right? You have an Apple Watch that tracks your heart rate. You have a Fitbit that tracks your heart rate. Okay? You can buy a polar heart rate monitor for like 30 bucks if you want one of those. And so it's relatively-ish inexpensive to track heart rate. We can tell you go run at 5 miles an hour, what's your heart rate? Go run at 6 miles an hour on a treadmill, what's your heart rate? Prediction. Okay? This metabolic cart that we use, this metabolic cart costs about $22,000. Okay? That treadmill costs about $8,000. You can get a cheaper treadmill. That one's like running on the cloud. You get a cheaper treadmill for, $500 or $600, but it's going to be more expensive. Okay? So that's kind of why we oftentimes will use these heart rate tests. Don't worry about the Ymca bike test. We're not doing that right now. So I put this in here for lab purposes. We had also mentioned that you can use a 1 mile walk test, okay? Figure out how long it takes you to walk a mile and what your heart rate is at the end of it. If we know age, weight, and sex, we can estimate VO2. That's basically what we're going to do. We're going to use your resting heart rate, and we're going to use a 6-minute walk test. And we can do all of that, okay? There are various running or jogging tests. There's a 1.5 mile test or a 12-minute run. These are going to be reasonable examples. There's some tables that if we know your age and we see you got to go run as fast as you can. That's the problem with these tests is you're going to run a 1.5 miles. You got to have Samantha run as fast as she can for that 1.5 miles. She can't sandbag like I would do. Okay? Can't just be like, this sucks, I'm not running. I'm going to go slow. Okay? That won't give us an accurate estimation. So here's some advantages of these field tests versus laboratory tests. Basically, lab tests are time-intensive and expensive. Field tests like running a mile or walking a mile or using heart rate, they're less expensive. You don't have to have specialized equipment. You can just go outside and use your phone now and do those kinds of things. Okay? All right. So let's see where we are. 12:17. You guys want to be done?
Yeah.
Okay. So this is as reasonable a place as anything for us to call a stop. Okay. So Kelly really wants to be done.
I didn't mean it like that.
It came out that way. Freudian slip of all time there. Yes, I want to be done. Shut up, Dr. Black. So that's okay. All right, so we'll stop here, okay? On Monday, we'll do training adaptations and we'll do how we prescribe aerobic exercise. We'll talk about FIT and PROS. And on Monday, I will assign lab number 2, okay? Remember, you have until tonight, right, 11:59 to get your lab turned in. If you have questions, send me a text message, send me an email, okay? All right. Have a good rest of the week, guys. Have a good weekend.
Are we turning in this activity?
Oh, yes, please turn in your activity.
If we did on like the workout,
If it's on a Word document, email it to me.